Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Library of the Weird. I hope you're doing fine wherever you are. I certainly am, and mostly because at the time of this filming, I just crossed 100 subs on YouTube. And while this probably doesn't sound like that much, you have to remember I started this channel at the beginning of this year, like 11 months ago, and I just wanted to talk to people about the books that I like. And I didn't promote it that much. Also, I chose to speak in English, although it's not my native tongue. And for that, I think 100 subs is really, really great. And I think at least half of them are not friends and family, although I'm thankful for each and every one of you. Also, I just bought a new lens. I want to play around a bit with lighting, and I hope I can up the quality of the channel a little bit, and I hope you're along for the ride. And because of all of this, I thought, what better way to celebrate this than to tell you about my top 5 current horror authors. So before we dive into my top 5, I just wanted to get a few honorable mentions out of the way. And this is not because I'm too lazy to make a huge list of authors that I like. I just wanted to tell you about 5 specific authors that have released something fairly recently and that probably many of you don't know or don't really know. And also I'm planning to do this maybe once a year or once every other year. And if I were to put my all-time favorite horror authors in this list, half of the list would look like the half of the list of every other person who has ever released something like this. And for my first honorable mentions author, I chose Stephen King. Everyone who has read horror books or likes reading horror books has at least read one book by Stephen King. I mean, even people who don't like horror have at least read one book by Stephen King. He's like the biggest author in the genre. There are tons of movies made out of his books, and he would be on my list as well if I were to make an all-time favorite list. And just because of that, because everybody knows him and he's the biggest author, I put him into honorable mentions, and I don't want to talk about him in my top 5 list. And of course, I like him very much. I reviewed his most recent novel, Holly. If you haven't checked it out, please watch it. And yeah, so much for Stephen King. The next entry on my honorable mentions list is Shirley Jackson. I think most people know Shirley Jackson. She's like the most famous female horror writer, or she was the most famous female horror writer because she died a few decades ago. She's most famous for her novels The Haunting of Hill House, or We Have Always Lived in the Castle, or The Lottery. She's also written tons of short stories. For example, there's The Summer People or The Visit. She often has female main characters that have some kind of social anxiety or some kind of mental illness and are pretty creepy for the most part. And she has a very, very claustrophobic writing style, a very eerie writing style, and I like her very, very much. But because she's been dead for so long and almost everybody knows her, she's not on the list as well. And the last entry on the honorable mentions list is Thomas Ligotti, which probably some of you don't know. I don't think that he's that famous. He's mostly writing short fiction. He's released a few short story collections. The first I read was Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe. I've also reviewed this book on my channel, and it was actually the book that made me decide what content I want to release on this channel. He's writing very, very literary fiction. I've heard from people that they don't really like his writing style because it's boring. And yeah, with most literary works, he's more concerned with themes or with the characters. Most of his characters, like Shirley Jackson's characters, are kind of strange people that don't really fit into society, sometimes loners, sometimes not. I like him very much. He's sometimes called the modern Lovecraft, although his writing style is very, very different from H.P. Lovecraft. But in my opinion, he should be as famous. But he hasn't released something in ages as well, so he's also not on my top 5 list. But that was the last entry from the honorable mentions, and now let's go to the top 5. And I don't really like ranking things. I don't like tier lists. I don't like to rank things I like. And because of that, I'm just making a list of my favorite horror authors, and they are in no particular order. And the first entry on this list is John Langan. John Langan has been around for quite some time as well. He's writing literary horror as well as genre horror. He's probably mostly known for his novel The Fisherman, which is about a fisherman who hears a very, very strange story. This is kind of a mix of folk horror. There's a bit of cosmic horror, Lovecraftian horror, and I liked it very, very much. He also, many of his stories take place in rural America, something he has in common with, for example, Nathan Bellingrad, although I think John Langan does this quite a bit better. He's also released, I think, 2 or 3 other novels, and then a few short story collections, and also works of his have appeared in other short story anthologies. For example, I recently read Screams from the Dark by Alan Detlow, and he had the last and longest stories in there called Blutzuger, which is Lower German for bloodsucker, and it's again about a strange fish, and there's a lot of mythology and folk horror in there, and I really do like reading folk horror, and that's basically why he's on his list, because I think he does this very, very well. The second entry on my list is Victor LaValle. He was first introduced to me with his novella The Ballad of Black Tom, which is kind of a spin on Lovecraft. As you probably know, Lovecraft was a great storyteller, great writer, but he was also crazy racist. And Victor LaValle is black, and The Ballad of Black Tom is a spin on these racial issues. He often uses black characters. Black Tom in this book is also a black character. I read this book. I mean, it's just 150 pages, but I read this book on one train ride. I liked it very, very much. And he's written several other novels. Another famous one is called The Changeling. Then this year I've read Lone Woman, which is also a great book about black women at the turn of the 19th century. She leaves her home and wants to start a new life as a farmer, and she has a pretty dark secret, but also LaValle in this story tries to tell how difficult it was for not only a woman but a black woman to do something like that at that time. And this is a theme in many of his works. He tries to show the suffering of Black people in the past, but also how the people suffer now today. And I think this definitely comes across, and this is something I really, really do like about his works. So if you haven't read anything by him, please check him out. At least those two books and then The Changeling are all very, very good. The third entry on my list is Canadian author Gemma Files, who's not only a writer, she also has a podcast. She's doing film and movie reviews, I think, and she's doing a lot more. And her latest short story collection, In That Endlessness Our End, won the Bram Stoker Award last year. I've also reviewed this book on this channel. If you haven't checked it out, please watch it because I like this one very, very much. And what she likes to do is, so she's writing literary horror, and literary horror oftentimes tries to subvert the expectations of the reader and also tries to subvert common tropes of horror. And this is something she really likes to do. She's using very, very strange things as horror devices. In here, there's, for example, a story which centers around a light bulb, or basically a slasher story where a house is the killer. The house changes placing and kills people. That's very strange, but those are also very, very good stories. She also tends to incorporate very modern things like chat histories or texting into her stories. There's one story in here which is basically just an interview, and it's a really, really scary story, which basically means that she really succeeds in using strange types of storytelling and still getting the eerie off feeling across that you would normally get when you read other horror stories. So as I said multiple times now, I really like her. I really like her writing. There's another story in here which is more folk horror, which is my favorite story out of this book. So please check this one out. Please check Gemma Files out. I very much like her. The fourth entry on my list is Mexican-Canadian author Silvia Moreno Garcia, who is probably most famous for her novel Mexican Gothic, which is a Gothic novel set in Mexico. It's about a woman visiting her cousin, and she wants to find out if the husband of her cousin wants to kill this said cousin. And this is also a very strange story. I would say it's quite literary as well. And because it doesn't really rely on jump scares or stuff like that, but you get a really, really eerie and strange feeling reading the story. I enjoyed it very, very much. But what I enjoyed even more is her latest book, Silver Nitrate. This book is about also a Mexican woman who works as an editor, a movie editor, and she's in love with horror movies. And she finds this strange director who has directed some of her favorite movies, and she asks him about a certain lost movie. And together with another friend, they try to restore that movie. And while doing that, they cross paths with mystical powers and a strange occultist Nazi. And yeah, it is a strange story, but I really enjoyed this book. I liked it very much. I also reviewed this book on this channel, so please check the video out if you haven't already. And something that she tries to do is to put a lot of Mexican culture into her books. And you probably noticed that I like learning about different cultures. That's why I like Victor Laval, I like Silvia Moreno Garcia, but I also like John Langan, who tells stories about rural America. And this is something I very much enjoy, and one of the things I really like about all of those authors. And with that, let's go to the final entry on this list. And while all the other authors were in no particular order, I think I have to say that this is my current favorite horror author. And if I were to make a list of my favorite authors, not only my favorite horror authors, but favorite authors, period, I think he would be very close to the top as well. And this is none other than Stephen Graham Jones, who is a native writer. He's a literature professor, and he's doing a lot of work for the horror community as well as the Native American community. He is probably best known for his novel The Only Good Indians, which won a lot of awards. This is a very strange book that is part revenge story, part slasher story, part indigenous culture book, and you learn a lot while reading this, although it's fiction. I once looked at a list with books that have the same vibe as Hereditary, and this one was on this list as well, and I would agree. While reading this, you have this very, very eerie feeling. You try to figure out what the hell is going on. And I like this very much about this book. Stephen Graham Jones also has a very, very unique writing style. For example, he can write very, very visceral scenes, but then he can also write very dreamlike or fast-paced scenes. I think he just has a very, very broad range of the stuff he can write. Just to give you an example, like I said, this book is a slower book. Like, it has the vibe as Hereditary. He's also writing a slasher trilogy, and this one is called the Lake Witch Trilogy. The first book was called My Heart is a Chainsaw, and the latest book is the second book. It's called Don't Fear the Reaper. It's about a Native American woman who is kind of an outsider in her city, and she has to fight like the slasher in both of these books. And I like them very much. I can't wait for the third novel in the series. And while he's probably most famous for his books, he's also writing tons of short stories. He has released his own short story collections, but he's also writing stories for other collection. I have two by Ellen Dedlow here, Screams from the Dark. There he has a story about a monster. And then I have A Christmas and Other Horrors, which I haven't read yet, where he also has a story in. And every time I see his name, I just buy the book. I don't read what the book is about. I just buy it because I like him so much. So if you haven't checked out anything by him, please, please, please read anything, just anything. Everything you pick up will be good. And with that, I'm finished with my top 5 list. Please tell me if you have read anything by any of the authors I told you and how you liked it, or if you are interested in reading about one of the authors I talked about. And I want to thank you all again, because 100 subscribers is very, very big for me. And yeah, I try to up the quality of this channel. I have a lot of plans for future videos, and I hope you are along for the ride. Until then, goodbye.